Yeah, you bring up an interesting point, and it's one of the, I guess, the education slash miseducation about some of the practices that the World Health Organization and governments around the world talking about staying clean, washing hands, sanitizing. But then obviously the biggest issue right now is the mask wearing, and every day there's another viral video of somebody being physically removed for not wearing a mask, and fights are breaking out, and it's people saying it's unconstitutional, all this stuff. Yeah, it's very interesting to see why people are so up in arms about wearing a mask. Like, masks are being worn all over the world before COVID, and there's obviously a reason. Like, obviously, air quality is an issue in a lot of countries. So I've just never understood what the big deal is about the mask wearing. So it's interesting that you bring that up, and like the fights that are occurring, and why people are just oblivious to the fact that you can get this at any point. And we were talking earlier offline about July, the start of July, a couple of countries are celebrating their birthdays, and then within 10 days there's another spike because of behavior that kind of that's going against the grain. But you can't really blame people for wanting to get together, because we are still tribal by nature. So I don't know, how does the government or health organization do a better job to squash the misinformation about mask wearing?
I don't know whether they can squash it, right? I mean, so there's you've brought up a bunch of really important kind of factors, because I think in some sense, if we step back from just a purely scientific aspect of it, the purely statistical aspect of it, and look at this like an exercise in product psychology or design, this thing makes sense. Because who ended up stroking these tensions of saying, okay, no, it's your right, it's your personal right, etc. You could, the politicians in the US could have made this a political statement by saying, it's patriotic to wear a mask. They could have done that. In fact, they're finally starting to do that now, because they've kind of hit that tipping point. So they could have easily gone and sold that as a product. So we call this stuff in product design or product psychology, right? I mean, so this is one of the other hats I have to wear. And my just as a segue, my career evolution has gone really from somewhat as a scientist, someone as a mathematician, to realizing that on an island is kind of useless if you don't understand the creatures who you're trying to affect, which is the human beings, right? So you really have to be a product psychologist and try and understand human nature as well. But if you look at it from the human nature aspect of it, a lot of this starts making sense, which is they sold the product of being on the winning team. So people, all the politicians who wanted to be on the winning team can just immediately park the objective truth in favor of their personal truth, and then wrap a narrative around it. And that's exactly what's happened. So people have said, well, it's your personal rights are being violated if you're being told to wear a mask. And of course, people want to latch onto that, because to your point, we're all tribal. We want to belong to some type of a group. And so, people end up getting meaning in binding together with a common enemy and a common cause. So that's galvanized them. But now all of a sudden, we've completely switched to the other side. And it's going to be hard for them to change course, right? They've got to do a complete 180, going, your constitutional rights being violated, to all of a sudden it's being patriotic. And again, if the data is still sitting right there, even if the mask works 20% of the time, 10% of the time, that's 10% less infections you're going to spread out there, right?
Yeah.
So even if you're a carrier, and here's the irony, in a lot of Asian countries, when someone's actually sick, they tend to wear a mask so as to not infect other people. Yet in North America, et cetera, the rest of the world, we're not following suit. So as much as we can kind of cast aspersions upon, and in a very racist way too, because I mean, the entire anti-Asian, anti-Chinese sentiments that have come about, people are just being outright racist towards, Asian people of any type of, country that they may come from, is unfair, because they've tried to do a lot, because they've understood, they've lived in these tropical or very difficult circumstance countries, right, where they're crowded, the hygiene isn't as good, but they've learned to adapt a series of hygiene practices that have been, frankly, much better than what we've managed to politicize over here.